After a 1960s greaser perishes from a tragic drag racing accident, he's sent back to Earth to become a socially inept teenager's guardian angel. Sometime during the 1960s, the town's youth gather and hang out by the local quarry. There, greaser Bobby Fontana challenges Joe to a game of chicken for making a pass at his girlfriend Emily. The men are to drive towards the edge of the cliff, and whoever jumps out of their car first loses. Before the race, Emily begs her boyfriend to back out, emphasizing that she loves him and Joe knows it too. However, the man insists that he can't back out now because his honor's at stake. During the race, the competitors drive their cars toward the cliff. Joe dives out of his car before Bobby does, to the winner's delight. However, just as he's about to jump out of his car, his bracelet gets caught on the stick shift. The vehicle careens over the cliff and crashes in the rocky ground below before bursting into flames. The crowd runs toward the ledge, and the devastated Emily sobs in Joe's arms upon realizing her boyfriend's tragic fate. Moments later, the confused Bobby finds himself inside a subway train filled with some odd passengers. They stop at a station where a man in a white suit points them toward an escalator heading to Uptown. While the other passengers are allowed entry by two other men in white suits, they stop Bobby, mention that he's one of Rafferty's boys, and ask him to step aside. Seconds later, a man on a motorcycle arrives, introduces himself as Rafferty, and orders Bobby to hop on his bike. The older man takes him to a restaurant bustling with people. He asks Bobby about the last thing he remembers, and he says he still recalls the race. Then he remembers Emily, so he demands that Rafferty take him back because he has something important he needs to tell her. However, the older man refuses since Bobby's already dead. He tries to live Midtown, but no matter which door he takes, he always ends up in the same room. Defeated, he returns to Rafferty's table and states that he thought the afterlife would be filled with angels. The older man corrects him and says that what he's describing is Uptown, and that he's currently in Midtown, a way station souls temporarily inhabit before they're permanently placed in Uptown or downtown. When Bobby asks what he needs to do to move to Uptown, Rafferty says he'll need to carry out a special assignment to convince the powers that be that he deserves ascension. Later, the older man tells him to board a train and ride it until he receives his assignment. Bobby asks how long he has to stay on the vehicle, but when he sees a Viking, he realizes he could be there for centuries. In the present, awkward teen Lenny works the grill in the diner, and his boss Max gives him a hard time for his many mistakes. He thinks his boss doesn't like him very much, but his coworker and friend Melissa assures him that he's doing fine. Suddenly, Sharon walks into the diner, and the teen is in awe of his crush's beauty. So he approaches Sharon's table, where she sits with her boyfriend Fred and his friend Bill. The bullies make fun of him, and Fred warns him to quit staring at his lady. Meanwhile, outside the diner, strong winds and flashing lights frighten the crowd. Suddenly, Rafferty and Bobby arrive at the parking lot on the former's motorcycle. They enter the diner, and the greaser is confused about all the changes in the world since he passed. Rafferty informs him that none of the mortals can see them, and that he's only allowed to reveal himself to his assigned person. Just then, Lenny passes by to serve Sharon's order, but Bill trips the teen, and the food spills all over the woman. Bobby calls Lenny a spaz, but is in disbelief when Rafferty informs him that the so-called spaz is his assignment. Moments later, Max fires Lenny and throws him out of the diner. The next day, the teen hangs out by the quarry before school. When his alarm sounds, he turns to leave, but he slips on the edge and falls off the cliff. Fortunately, Bobby's there to catch him before he hits the ground. Minutes later, he thanks his savior and wants to know his name. However, the impatient man leaves and disappears. Then, Bobby mounts Rafferty's motorcycle, and when the older man asks him what he's doing, he says he's ready to go to Uptown because he's done his job saving Lenny's life. However, Rafferty informs him that he hasn't completed his mission. He has to become Lenny's friend and has to convince the teen that he isn't worthless. When Bobby asks how he's supposed to do that, the older man says he has to figure it out himself. Later, the greaser observes Lenny in class and sees that he's a smart but awkward kid. At lunch, Bobby walks around the cafeteria admiring the ladies. He sits next to a student and knocks her book to the floor so he can peek under her blouse. Suddenly, the radio on the table broadcasts Rafferty's voice, reminding him to stick to his mission. Meanwhile, Melissa joins Lenny for lunch and suggests they study together after class. He agrees, but quickly excuses himself when he sees Sharon. Lenny approaches her to apologize for last night. Bill threatens to beat him up, so the invisible Bobby tosses the bully onto the used cafeteria trays. He then pushes the cart onto another table, causing Bill to land on the cake, eliciting laughter from the crowd. After class, Bobby finds Lenny at the quarry again and formally introduces himself. He explains that he's dead and that he was brought back to Earth to help him out. Creeped out, the teen says he needs to get home soon, so the man says he can prove that he has powers. First, he tosses his leather jacket over the cliff and says he can make it fly. However, the garment simply falls to the ground below. Next, he says he can make a tree disappear with a wave of his hand, but once again, nothing happens. He then tears up the teen's workbook, promising to put the pages back together. But when Lenny sees that the pages remain torn, he starts to walk away. Finally, Bobby tells him to stand by the road and watch as he faces through an oncoming truck. However, the man chickens out at the last second and dives to the side of the road. They return by the cliff and the teen is about to leave. Fed up by Lenny's refusal to believe any of his claims, the man berates him and says he never asked to do any of this. Suddenly, the pair realizes they've walked over the edge and are floating above the quarry, proving that Bobby does have powers. On their way back to town, Bobby says Lenny has to change his image so he can get Sharon to notice him. So, they head to a clothing store where the man chooses an outfit that looks similar to the one he has on. When the teen points out that he doesn't feel like himself in the clothes, Bobby snaps his fingers to make Lenny's clothes disappear, so the teen backtracks and says he liked the outfit. That evening, they head to a junkyard to get the teen a car, because Bobby says he can't pick ladies up on his bicycle. They find an old car and the man proceeds to use his powers to give it a new paint job, new tires, a working engine, and new seats. Later, they head to an empty parking lot where Bobby teaches Lenny how to approach women. He emphasizes that he needs to walk into a room with confidence and to make women feel like he has all the answers. Soon, he takes the teen to different locations to put his teachings to the test. However, the inexperienced and nervous Lenny fumbles all his interactions. Eventually, the man takes him to a nightclub where he says the women know how to treat a man right. However, upon entering the establishment, he realizes it's a bar catering to men who are attracted to other men. As they're about to leave, 3 women approach the vehicle and ask for a ride to the boulevard. During the ride, one of the women flirts with Lenny in the front seat, while Bobby enjoys being sandwiched between 2 women in the back seat. Later, in the teen's bedroom, the friends smoke illegal substances, and its effects cause Bobby to float to the ceiling. He then uses his powers to levitate Lenny, causing them both to start giggling. Suddenly, Lenny's mother knocks on the door and asks why he's laughing. Bobby recognizes the voice and follows the woman to her room. He shockingly discovers that the teen's mother is Emily and that she ended up marrying Joe. The man searches for Rafferty and confronts him about withholding the information regarding Lenny's parents. He demands that they find him another assignment, so the older man promises to speak with the higher-ups about Bobby's request. Meanwhile, Emily and Joe talk to their son about where he got his new outfit and car. The teen explains that his new friend Bobby gave them to him, even though he doesn't really know much about him. When the mother shows concern regarding her son's recent behavior, he assures her that he's got everything covered. The teen's words and disappearance catch the woman off guard since they remind her of Bobby. Later that night, the greaser sits by the couple's window and watches Emily sleep. The next day, on his way to school, Lenny pulls up to the stoplight next to the bullies and Sharon. Fred points out how a loser like him doesn't match with his cool ride. So, Lenny steps on the gas once the light turns green and speeds off. In school, the other students are starting to notice his cool new vibe. Then, Melissa speaks to him about missing their study session yesterday, but he indifferently brushes her off. In class, Lenny flirts with Sharon, so Fred challenges him to a fight after school. Meanwhile, Bobby returns to the crash site that ended his life. Rafferty mentions that most souls usually find themselves drawn back to the place where they died. When he informs the man that they found a new assignment for him, Bobby says he changed his mind and he'd like to stick out with Lenny because he's invested a lot of time on him. Rafferty asks if Emily's involvement won't be an issue, and the man assures he'll handle it. After class, the teen fearfully walks to his car where Fred and Bill are waiting for him. When the bully moves to strike first, Lenny hits him on the groin and face with his book. Then Fred stands back up, but he runs into the front car door when Lenny opens it, knocking him back to the ground. To avenge his friend, Bill moves to strike the teen, but an invisible Bobby stops his arms before tossing him over the fence. After the fight, Sharon asks the victor for a ride home. That evening, Bobby joins the teen on his date with Sharon. To his surprise, Sharon says she needs to be home by 10, so they should skip dinner and get straight to lovemaking. Later, the greaser waits outside while the pair make love in the car. After they take her home, Bobby expresses his doubts about whether Sharon's the right woman for Lenny. When the teen asks him not to bring down the mood, the man apologizes and says they should celebrate him finally sleeping with a woman. Later, they return home intoxicated, but Joe catches the teen walking up the stairs. The man says he's grounded before helping him into bed. When Emily learns that her son came home drunk, she enters his room and tucks him into bed while Bobby watches. The next day, Lenny sits with the popular girls, but sees Melissa disappointedly staring at him. Fred and Bill angrily watch the teen and decide they need to think of a sinister plan for their revenge. Unbeknownst to them, Bobby listens in on their conversation. So he warns Lenny about the bullies, but the teen brushes off his concern. That night, Emily flips through her yearbook and sees her picture with Bobby. In the living room, the greaser pranks Joe by switching the channels on the TV, while wondering how the man managed to marry Emily. Moments later, an invisible Bobby joins Emily and asks her why she married Joe when she could have done better. Suddenly, Lenny leaves the house despite his mother's reminder that he's grounded. Before he gets in his car, Bobby tells him that he's becoming a jerk and that he shouldn't speak to his mother that way. However, the determined teen drives off to a party. After he picks Sharon up, she suggests they swing by the diner first, and the teen says he doesn't mind seeing his old boss Max again. In the diner, Melissa angrily serves the couple their waters before storming off. His date calls Melissa a loser, and he disagrees. He heads to the kitchen, hoping to speak to his friend, but when he sees her crying, he turns around and tells Sharon they need to leave. Meanwhile, at the house, Bobby finally reveals himself to Emily, and the woman passes out in shock. He then carries her inside the house and lays her down on the bed. At the party, Lenny sadly watches Sharon dancing with other guys. Concurrently, Emily regains consciousness and tells Bobby that Joe helped her through her grief after he passed. She says he's a good husband who loves the kids. When he asks if she loves Joe, she says she does. But when he asks if she loves Joe the same way she loved him, she doesn't give him an answer. Eventually, the man takes Emily on a trip down memory lane by bringing her to the different spots in town where they shared their special memories. While on a stroll, the woman asks him what he thinks of Lenny. He says they were getting along great until the teen became too full of himself. Finally, she reveals that Lenny's his son and that even after Joe found out, he still wanted to marry her, making Bobby realize that he might have been wrong about Joe. Then, the man says he should have told her that he loved her when he was still alive. They share a brief kiss when he suddenly sees Rafferty waiting for him. Later, he takes Emily back to the house. He tells her not to worry about Lenny and promises he'll take care of everything. When she asks if she'll ever see him again, Bobby says he'll always be with her. Before he leaves, they share one last kiss. Downstairs, he stops by the living room to thank a sleeping Joe for everything. Outside the house, he mounts Rafferty's motorcycle and they drive off. Eventually, at Midtown, Bobby celebrates the news that he has a son with the other patrons. He joins a somber Rafferty at the table, who admonishes him for revealing himself to a human who isn't his assignment. However, Bobby regrets nothing, stating that sharing a moment with Emily and learning about Lenny was worth it. The next day, the teen intercepts Melissa on the sidewalk and asks if they can talk. She doesn't want to speak to him, explaining that he's changed into a person she doesn't like. Suddenly, Fred and Bill arrive and challenge Lenny to a gut race at the quarry. Despite Melissa's pleas to just let it go, the teen accepts the dare. In Midtown, Bobby snoops through Rafferty's ledger and discovers Lenny's name in the arriving passengers list. When he asks the older man what it means, he explains that Fred challenged his son to a race. The man begs Rafferty to take him back to Earth to save his son. However, the older man says Lenny's destined for his fate and they can't intervene. Bobby explains that he's responsible for what's about to happen to the teen. He's seen everything that he's lost due to his impulsive actions, and he can't let his son end up the same way. Desperate, he tells Rafferty that he's willing to trade his soul for his son's salvation. At the quarry, Melissa begs Lenny to back out, but he says that his honor's at stake. Just as the race starts, Emily and the rest of her family arrive, but they're too late to stop the teen from driving off. As the competitors near the edge of the cliff, Fred dives out of his car. However, when Lenny tries to do the same, his door won't open. Suddenly, Bobby appears beside him, but the vehicle continues off the cliff and it falls to the bottom where it crashes and burns. The crowd rushes to the edge, but to their surprise, Lenny climbs back up with Bobby's help. Melissa helps him up to his feet and they share a kiss. His family gives him a hug and he promises that it'll be the last race he'll ever be in. Later, the teen thanks Bobby for saving his life again, and the man jokingly says that it's his job because he's his guardian angel. When the man says his goodbyes, Lenny says they were just starting to become best friends. So, Bobby assures him that no matter where he goes, they'll always be best friends. They share one last hug before the man walks towards Rafferty. Seeing Bobby resigned to his fate downtown after surrendering his soul, the older man happily informs him that he's actually on his way uptown. He explains that when Bobby sacrificed himself to save his son, he showed the higher-ups that he was capable of love and valuing someone else over himself. Overjoyed, the man rides Rafferty's motorcycle and they fly off into the sky. Soon, he's back in the escalator to Uptown, and he excitedly rides the contraption to the eternal life he's always dreamt of.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.